Hello, I'm Robert Royal, and these are the Catholic Thing podcasts. The Catholic Thing is a daily series of columns of 1,000 words, which you can read very briefly and you can subscribe to for free. You just need to go to www.thecatholicthing.org, and it will come into your email inbox every morning, 365 days a year. We have one of our regular TCT writers with us today, Michael Pakaluk, who is a philosopher and a professor of philosophy at the Catholic University of America here in Washington, D.C. Michael, it's great to have you with us this morning.
It's really great to be here, Bob.
Michael, I want to just for the sake of some of our viewers and our listeners who don't know about the controversy that has arisen this week, we're recording on the 20th, I believe, of January 2024. There's a controversy that's arisen in Rome over a book that's been rediscovered by the current prefect, the head of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is to say the most authoritative and the highest level of doctrinal definition in the Roman Catholic Church. And his name is Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez. The book is called La Pasión Mística, Mystical Passion in Spanish, and it came out in the 1990s, and it contains a number of quite graphic sexual comments. Could you, just for the sake of helping our readers who aren't already familiar with this controversy, just tell us a bit about the book and how you view it?
The book came out in 1998. Fernandez was 36 years old at the time. He had published many scholarly articles. He was a mature, well-established theologian. So it's not some kind of thing that he threw off when he was a teenager or something like that. And he has never disowned it or disclaimed it. He said he wouldn't print it now because it would be misunderstood, but he hasn't rejected it or attempted to refute it or distance himself from its teachings. And it has it's basically, its view is that the sexual desire is inherently ecstatic in a spiritual way towards God, and that orgasm is an intense ecstasy, which in a baptized person can be, maybe is, typically an act of worship of God. It's really wacky, and and it also is very, very, as you say, it's graphic. It describes sexual organs, states of arousal, states of sexual organs after intercourse, in a way that, when Augustine, for example, discusses sex before the fall, it's very discreet. He apologizes for talking about it, and subsequent translators, as you know, usually put it into Latin. When Pope John Paul II in Love and Responsibility talks about the marital act as a reflection of the one body unity of husband and wife, he does talk about climax, and he says that more as a counsel to the man to be selfless, that the climax of the husband and wife to represent the one flesh unity is ideally simultaneous. But he says it in a sentence and very discreetly and within the context of marriage, with sound theological significance. For Fernandez, it's completely different. He views sex, you might want to say autonomously, as having a mystical and spiritual dimension. And there's no discussion of marriage or the one flesh unity of marriage. In fact, he seems to be wants to say that this kind of mystical experience could take place between people who are not married and even homosexuals.
Yeah, let me just say, some people who want to defend both the cardinal and the book, even granting that there was a moment when he thought it was okay to do this, point to the mystical tradition, even the Bible, the Song of Songs. There's a kind of I would say, symbolic use of the love of a man and a woman for the love of God for us and our love of God. There are efforts to invoke Saint Teresa of Avila, the great Spanish mystic. There's a famous Bernini sculpture of her in the Church of Our Lady of Victory in Rome that kind of shows her in ecstasy. Saint Teresa of Avila in ecstasy. What is the difference that you've kind of touched on it? But could you play that out a little bit further for us? That difference between the mystical tradition that does refer to sex and the way that this book was written.
It's the difference between good sense and bad judgment. Teenagers will go into that church in Rome and they'll point to the statue of Bernini and say, "Ah, ha, ha! Look, she's having an orgasm." That's not what's going on. No one with mature judgment who knows mystical theology would say anything like that. That's actually almost a blasphemy. And I've read a lot of Saint Teresa of Avila. I don't see anything like this in her writings. Um, it's it's in the Song of Songs. It's a celebration of the beauty of the human body, and it's presumed that the man and the woman are either espoused or they're courting with a view towards getting married. The intentions are good. That's what people used to say. The man's intentions are good. They're not to possess her outside of marriage. So the Fernandez work comes out of you might say, a worldly view of sex, where there's a sex urge and a life of sexuality. And as he said in his document on blessing, that this sex urge finds its full fulfillment in marriage. But that's not the correct way of looking at it. That's not a Catholic way of looking at it. Catholic way of looking at it is that the sexual act is called the marital act, that it has its meaning and significance in an action that's open to procreation between husband and wife who are joined indissolubly for life, and that all other sex acts are kind of fallings away from this. They're declensions from the true sex act. So the sound Catholic sensibility always looks at sex in relationship to marriage.
Yeah, I was struck when I read the book that there was no reference whatever to the procreative element in sexuality. It's as if sexuality kind of exists in some isolated field, which is primarily dominated by the desire for a unified pleasure, rather than that larger Catholic
Look,
understanding of what sexuality is for, if we can actually put it that way. And I want to ask you, because you are a very astute, not only observer in a human sense, but also a very acute philosopher. Some theologians have said that they believe that there's this kind. You called it an Eday Fix in the article you wrote about. You wrote yesterday in the Catholic thing about this book. But some theologians have said that this kind of obsession may even help for us to account for some of the stranger, seemingly heterodox things that are said in Amoris Laetitia, the controversial encyclical that the Pope wrote that seemed to allow communion for divorced and remarried people, as well as as this paradigm shift that we've seen that the Holy Father is looking for in theology, and this so-called development in blessings, which include the blessings of homosexual couples. What's your reaction to that contention by theologians, by philosophers and theologians, that this seeming obsession with orgasm has theological and philosophical principles? It lies behind those theological and philosophical principles.
well, I first want to say that every mature person is going to have a certain kind of uh, reductionist view of an orgasm. Plato, in one of his dialogues, describes it as similar to lancing a boil. I mean, it's clearly a physical process where something is kind of pent up and then released, and it produces a lot of pleasure. And in that sense, it's kind of humdrum. I mean, really, the burden of proof is on the person who wants to say this is some kind of great spiritual thing. It's like a crack cocaine. It's pleasure. In fact, all the great doctors of the church looked at the pleasure of orgasm with a certain kind of suspicion, because there's the potential of actually just losing your rationality, and maybe sinning because you're losing your rationality. So there's a certain kind of, I want to say, just childishness about it. And can I be plain? Every father and mother I've spoken with who know about this book would say they wouldn't hire this guy to teach CCD in their high school. Never mind be the prefect for the whole of doctrine for the whole church. It's disturbed, it's creepy, and it's wacky, and it's disordered, and it's unbalanced. Every person of mature sensibility who reads this book has that judgment. Now, when Amoris Laetitia came out, there were some odd things in it. That's when I did research on Fernandez's writings. I went through his articles and I searched in particular for CCC 1735. That's the line about imputability of actions. And I found, half a dozen articles which use that line in the Catechism in the same way. I say this that I did the search, now almost 10 years ago, because you actually can't find these articles now if you go to the Catholic University of Buenos Aires in Argentina any longer. You cannot find them. They're not accessed. I gave links, and some of the links I gave to my own Dropbox for the Catholic Thing readers to get these articles. I couldn't get them from interlibrary alone. They're not listed in my computer. And similarly, it's pretty odd that I sent for a copy, interlibrary loan for a copy of this book on mystical passion. There's not a single copy of this book in any North American library. Now, how does that happen? Because no matter how bad your book is, how few copies it sold, it's going to end up in some library somewhere. It's not a single copy in any North American library. That's kind of also very suspicious and strange, at least. So anyway,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah.
I
Let me, because you're touching on something that is I find very curious, because Cardinal Fernandez has said recently, because this has caused such a great furor that he's had to respond to it in public, but that he said that the Pope knew about that book, and presumably he knew about these other writings as well, which, as you rightly show in your article with links, and when people who are interested can go to your article about this Eday Fix of Cardinal Fernandez, now Cardinal Fernandez's. I mean, the Holy Father knew about this, and you mentioned how parents wouldn't want their children to be in the CCD class with him. But there's even a notorious uh, episode in which he says that he had spoken with a 16-year-old girl who kind of spoke about a very creepy physical relationship with Jesus as Mary looked on. I too think that a person who's of sound judgment would be very hesitant to appoint a person like this to such a high position, let alone other positions. He was held up in being named the rector of the Catholic University in Argentina. Um, what are we to make of the fact that this is the man who now is making the major decisions, writing the major documents for the entire Catholic Church?
it's horrific in my view, and deeply disturbed. By the way, we have it only on Fernandez's word that Pope Francis knew about this book before he approved of it. So we don't know that from Pope Francis. I'm hesitant to attribute any judgments to Pope Francis. We know that twisted people like Father Maciel are very good at drawing others in. Father Maciel drew in John Paul II and had him completely hoodwinked. So I definitely think that's a possibility here. I'm not discounting that. But the Eday Fix, which I refer to, it's really two ideas. It's really they play on each other. One is this mystical elevation of mere sex urges and orgasm, which is disturbed. But the other is the diminution, the willingness to disclaim or diminish anyone's responsibility for sexual sins. So that's the Eday Fix, actually, which I had in mind. 1735, the Catechism. People can look it up. It says that imputability of human action can be diminished or even nullified on account of ignorance, inadvertence, fear. It mentions a few other things. Now, that's a really mixed list, and I take it to refer to the Church's tradition of commentary on moral responsibility. You can't just read that in isolation. And the standard Catholic view, the traditional Catholic view, is that the only condition which nullifies responsibility is non-culpable ignorance of particulars. You are responsible if you claim that you do not know the basic moral law of the Ten Commandments, because that's written on the human heart, and as St. Paul said, they are without excuse. And you are responsible if you think that you can't keep the Ten Commandments, because as the Council of Trent taught, it's in all of our ability to keep the Ten Commandments if we love God, and that if we find it impossible to do that, it's because of vices that we've acquired and we're responsible for. So this is the teaching of the church. And but Fernandez just takes that 1735 and he applies it indiscriminately, actually discriminately, only to sexual sins. He's not going to say that somebody who's a serial murderer might be a saint for all that we know, or one of these priests who's embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his parish might be a saint. It's only sexual sins that get this kind of special treatment. We saw that in Amoris Laetitia. It's only sexual sins, it's nothing else. That's the real issue, because now you have this kind of this potent but deeply misguided view of sexuality as a source of spiritual insight, together with this willingness to cut everybody slack when they're committing serious sexual sins. That's a terrible, terrible, terrible combination.
Yeah, well, I thought, I mean, it's funny in a kind of gruesome way that he says if a homosexual couple have a mystical experience, it doesn't necessarily cure them of their homosexuality. It takes the non-imputability even to that stage. Listen, we're getting near the end of our time, but I want you to speculate a little bit because we just heard in recent days. I think this is attempting to divert attention a little bit, but we've heard from Cardinal Fernandez that he's writing a document that is going to reply to a number of current moral questions, things like surrogacy, which the Holy Father has spoken out against recently, about gender ideology, about the whole phenomenon of so-called trans people. What do you expect? I'm going to ask you to go out on a limb. I know philosophers don't like to do this. It's not a logical inference, but what do you expect might be in that document? What would you hope would be there?
Well, it's not very good when the prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith says this will put you at ease. He's writing a document presumably to try to counterbalance something that he sees as already very disturbing to people. That's not a proper motive for writing any kind of church teaching. It already raises suspicions, as you said, of some kind of diversion or kind of take the heat off of him. Let's look at Amoris Laetitia. It's 8 chapters. The 8th chapter is the one that everyone found problematic. Chapters 1 through 7. Is anybody studying that? Does anybody find it particularly edifying? I think it was Ross Dotat who, at the beginning, said that looks like it was just a lead up for chapter 8, and that's the only role that it played. I do not have high expectations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, our time is done at this point. Michael, thank you for being with us. I want to encourage everyone listening or watching to read Michael. Michael writes for us regularly, but he writes in other places. He's written some extraordinary commentaries on the New Testament, the Gospels, especially the role of Mary in conveying information to us through the New Testament. So, Michael, thank you. This is going to be a busy year, 2024, and we're only still in the first few weeks of it, so we'll probably be seeing you back here before long. And let me just say again, thank you all of you who are watching and listening. And I'd like to just say again, please do subscribe to The Catholic Thing. I think you'll be very happy that you do. We try to bring you not only the most controversial things that are going on in the news, of course we do that, but we also try to bring to you some of the deeper understanding of the Catholic Church, which is very much needed, Catholic Church and Catholic teaching in our time in which there is so much confusion and controversy and angst and even anger. So these are the Catholic Thing podcasts, and we'll look forward to being with you next time.